Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Calhoun Show. If you're new, welcome aboard. What a Super Bowl. Unbelievable. I went back and listened. I don't usually listen to the episodes, but I listened to me and Dan and me and Stephanie last week and me and my brother the week before because I was curious what we had said going into this game. And we did good. We did good for ourselves. That was crazy. And watching that game, I found myself, and it was on Twitter, so if you follow me there, you know, but I found myself at a certain point just saying, all right, you know what? Go win this game about the Patriots. It's such a weird thing that everything we have in sports is debated now. I mean, embrace debate is a culture here. And I really just wanted a chance to have one thing where everybody had to sit back and agree. And if people are going to come to you now and say Tom Brady's not the best quarterback of all time, or people are going to come to you and say Bill Belichick's not the greatest coach of all time, then you can actually look at them and tell them that they're not right because we know something now. And I don't think Brady needed to win that game. But somebody asked me later in the fourth quarter, if Brady had to win. I said, if Brady ties this game, he's the best quarterback ever. It'll solidify it. Winning 5 would be great, and he did. But even if he hadn't, there's something to be said for bringing your team back from down 25 points and doing it not only in that dramatic way, but to be who he is. And this year and all of the things that come with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and the New England Patriots, to do that was incredible. And, you know, the cliched question that you're going to see on every talk program and every sports TV show and every debate podcast is going to be, did the Patriots win or did the Falcons lose? My analysis, I mean, the Patriots were incredible in the second half, and the Falcons seemed like they were in a moment that was bigger than what they were capable of. And it's interesting to see how teams bounce back from that. Sometimes teams go to the Super Bowl and lose and then turn around the year after and come back and win. That happens. Denver is an example of that with a quick turnaround from the Seattle loss. Quick year, obviously, and then right back and they win the Super Bowl. And Carolina is looking to do the same thing because Carolina was in the Super Bowl last year, and then this year, obviously, we know what happened to them. So it'll be interesting to me to see what happens with the Falcons. That's an interesting division. If I use the word interesting one more time, I will turn the podcast off just to spare you guys. But they're in a good division with a upstart team in Tampa Bay that I think is underrated. We know what New Orleans is capable of offensively. And obviously the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons being the other two teams. I'd be curious to see what Atlanta does to bounce back next year. In the first 4 games, you'll know. At least you'll know what direction they're headed down. Because if they come out and stumble out of the gate, it's easy to attribute that to this. And it might not be fair when that comes around. But this was a big moment. And there was a lot of mistakes. And now that you guys are hearing this on Thursday, the Super Bowl's 4 days old. You've heard all that stuff, so we don't need to do that part of it. But I had a lot of fun. I went down to Dan's house. Hung out with him and his lovely wife and their awesome son who cracks me up beyond belief. And I had a great time. Watched the first half there. I thought I was coming home to watch Lady Gaga perform and then kind of doze off on the couch to go to sleep. And as it turns out, we get arguably the best second half of a Super Bowl ever. It's not the best Super Bowl ever. People keep saying that. It's not. The first half was, compelling in the sense that Atlanta was up big on the Patriots, but it wasn't a great half. And so we'll talk about some of the predictions that were made by Dan and I and a few other notes. I have a couple other things to do. Plus, coming up on the podcast, very exciting, Pez from Days of Yore will be joining me. He's going to call in here later on to talk about the Boston Bruins firing Claude Julien, one of the best coaches in the NHL. And that team's headed in an interesting direction. It's hard to tell where they're going. It's hard to tell what Cam Neely wants. It's impossible to understand what Sweeney expected of Julien. And I'm curious, and the timing of it is really interesting with the fact that they fired Julien and have the press conference the same morning as the Patriots parade at a time where it's difficult for media to get in, for anybody to move around the city. And if that were standing on its own and it was a one-time incident, that would be one thing. But they fired Peter Chiarelli on the day of the Aaron Hernandez verdict. That was their GM, and they fired him that day. So it's safe to say that the Bruins are perfectly fine hiding behind the Patriots. And I had a problem with that, and Pez wrote a great piece on Days of Yore yesterday. So very excited to talk to him later in the episode. But as we always do, we get it started the right way. And I quickly mentioned it last week when we did this, but I didn't get into it because I didn't know what day he was coming back. But now I can officially say, on behalf of myself and Stephanie and everybody else that I know, Patty, we love you. Welcome home, buddy. And thank you again for doing what you do. Let's get this going. It's the Calhoun Show. As always, you can follow the show on Twitter at Calhoun Show and email the show calhounshow@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook and view or listen to every episode on YouTube. And obviously, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. And if you're on iTunes, leave us a nice little rating and review on the voicemail line 860-740-2119, 860-740-2119. So, coming out of this Super Bowl, I try to kind of form the show based on around the questions that I have. And one of the questions that I had was coming off the podcast with Dan last week is, was this Tom Brady's last Super Bowl? And I made the argument to Dan a week ago that it's not, based on where the Patriots look like they're headed as a team, as a franchise, the ability that Brady is still showing at this age, and the fact that he still is the best coach of all time. So that's one thing I'm curious about, is where you guys land on that. It is very difficult to repeat a Super Bowl champion. I understand that. But getting back to another one, I do think that's going to happen. Credit to Dan. He was just off on his score from last week. And by the way, my final score of, I think I had 31-27 Patriots. So, you know, Falcons don't hold. Falcons don't do this or that. They kick a field goal and the Patriots go for the 2 and don't get it. 31-27 looks pretty good. But alas, no luck. And or actually it would have been 31-26. But I would have been a point off. It would have been glorious. So it was fun. We got a couple of things really right. Dan said over 65 points. I told you that the Patriots wouldn't score in the first quarter. And bingo, got that one. I really felt like the Patriots were going to be ahead late in that game. And obviously after the way it started, that wasn't going to happen. But the Falcons were really bad. They were really bad in the second half. And that was the bummer for me. Was Brady was great. I saw a stat. He had more yards in the fourth quarter and overtime than 26 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks had in their whole game. And 6 of those guys were the MVPs of their Super Bowl. Like that's a silly stat. It's not possible that he could do that, and he did. He had 246 yards, I want to say, in just the fourth quarter and overtime. So, one of the big debates that's coming out now, and it's silly. It really is, because this is just reactionary stuff. These are things we're not upset about unless somebody mentions them or until they become relevant. Going into this game, did anybody say, if they go to overtime, they should really make sure that both teams touch the ball? No, they didn't say that before the Super Bowl. Did they say that before last year's Super Bowl? No. What about 49, 48, 47, 46? Did they say that before any of those? No, they didn't. And you know why they didn't? Because it hadn't come up yet. So now we've had an overtime in a Super Bowl, and now everybody's upset. Here's the problem. There's no perfect way to do overtime. I think there's a right way. I don't think they do it the right way, but I think there's a right way, and I think it's easy. You let each team touch the ball once, And then it's whoever's either winning after those 2 possessions or next score wins. Now, the issue with that is during the regular season, there's only 1 overtime. You end in a tie if no one scores. So the NFL would have to commit to getting rid of that. You'd have to have extended overtime until somebody scores. For me, I don't care. I imagine that would be a sticking point in the collective bargaining agreement, which is why I understand, or why I imagine they don't do it. Now, you might say, okay, fine, just do it in the playoffs. You can't have different rules. You got to play with the same rules. Week 1, week 7, and week 19, which is the Super Bowl. Or week 20. You have to play with the same rules all the time. And if you don't, then we're messing with things. And no one, that's not going to happen. So if you can extend overtime and get rid of ties in the NFL, then you can change the overtime rules so everybody touches the ball once. And if we're going to keep arguing for the college overtime system, then this is going to be a disaster. Are you going to try to draft fantasy players? Are you going to lose a fantasy league because a guy went to, 7 rounds in an overtime, starting at the 25-yard line, playing against Drew Brees? He's going to have 9 touchdown passes. What are we doing? We can't have college overtime rules. That's silly. That's silly. You can't do that at the NFL level. Stats are too important. The stats in the history of the league are too important to do that too. You can't do it. Just can't do it. And that argument is moot, and I don't want to hear it. Here's an interesting thought. Everyone's talking about how the Patriots are hosting the first game of the year next year, which they are because they're the Super Bowl champions, and the whole Roger Goodell's going to have to be there. It's going to be great. I want to know who they're going to play. Here are the Patriots' 2017 opponents that they play at home. Obviously, Bills, Dolphins, Jets being their divisional foes are options, but unlikely. Kansas City's compelling. If Tony Romo ends up in Kansas City, that's really compelling. The LA Chargers, I don't think you really care about that. Houston Texans, again, Romo makes it interesting, but who knows? Carolina, I don't think so. They started last year on the Thursday night in Denver, which they were not happy about, and I don't blame them. And here's the interesting one. The New England Patriots in 2017 host the Atlanta Falcons. Can you put Atlanta in New England the first week of September? Thursday Night Football? I don't know. I don't know if you can do that. I would do it because I'd be curious to see it. But it's interesting. That game also seems like it'd be really nicely slotted in like week 5 or 6. Let both teams get their feet wet, get the ball moving downhill, as it were, and then let them go at it again. But it'd be interesting. By the way, the Patriots website says San Diego Chargers on it, in case anybody wanted a good chuckle that the NFL doesn't know that the Chargers moved to LA. So, real quick, I want to move on. I want to move on from the Super Bowl because we saw it. And it was great, but it's Wednesday for me and it's Thursday for you, and you get it. It was phenomenal. And if it was another team that did that, by the way, we'd all be talking about it for a month if somebody else had a 25-point comeback. But it's the Patriots, so we're all kind of done with it. And I was really happy, by the way, for the New York Giants. I just want to mention that. Still the only team to beat the Patriots and Tom Brady's Patriots in the Super Bowl. I had a Packer fan give me shit for saying the Patriots don't lose to anybody in the Super Bowl. But the Tom Brady-led Patriots only lose to the Giants, and that continues. So that's lovely for me. All right, we got a couple of other things to do before we get to Pez. So here we go. Keep going. The Calhoun Show.
The Calhoun Show.
So before we go into the hockey, I want to talk a little bit of NBA basketball because we've had a couple of things happen here in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's 2 storylines that they merge with each other, which is weird, but separately they're fascinating to me. So number one is Cleveland. With this entire LeBron wants more players, they don't have enough to compete with Golden State. And Dan and I touched on this a little bit last week. So where we kind of settled was the Cavaliers, as they're presently built, can probably beat the Cavs, the Warriors. And that said, they probably won't the way they're currently built. Now, I said to my brother 2 weeks ago that Carmelo Anthony is a better basketball player than Kevin Love. I think what Carmelo Anthony does best, he does better than Kevin Love. But I should, and I know that I look silly because K-Love put up 39 the other night. And that's fine. And I can eat the humble pie. That's okay with me. And I'll do that because that was a silly statement. Kevin Love is a more useful player to the Cavs than Carmelo Anthony would be. But I think there is something to the point of Carmelo could be ball dominant for 10 to 15 minutes a game, and you could legitimately let Kyrie and LeBron play 34 minutes instead of 46 minutes. So that would be helpful. It really would. You can't run the team through Kevin Love when those two come off the floor, but you can through Carmelo if you chose to do that. Overall, does it help the Cavs? It probably doesn't. Kevin Love probably does more for them as a team than Carmelo could, and it's a bad deal. Now, that said, I still think that the Cavaliers should make a move of some kind. I think going to get someone to help Kyrie in the backcourt would be huge for them. Somebody that can move the ball, not another shooter. You have Korver, you have J.R. Smith coming back at some point, you have LeBron, you have Kyrie. Those are the only two guys that can move with the ball as well as they do. If you went and got a third guy, not on that level, but something close that could spell Kyrie, that would be huge. The Carmelo side of it is the really, really, really juicy stuff. Because the Knicks they're a dumpster fire, and it's embarrassing what's happening to the New York Knicks. And it's on Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson's been a terrible executive. He's bizarre. He uses Twitter like a high school kid uses it to get his problems out. He is trying to run a star player out of town, and it's a star player that he signed less than 2 years ago to a contract that included a no trade clause. I mean, what are we doing? Look at the history of the New York Knicks. I mean, if you could pull up a list of the players that Carmelo Anthony has had to play with in his tenure with the Knicks. And now I understand Carmelo's time with the Knicks began in a bad way with the sign and trade, and that was Carmelo's fault. That's fine. I can agree to that. But as little as Carmelo has done to help that team win a championship, it doesn't go anywhere past just the coaches that this team has had. Listen to this. This year it's Jeff Hornacek. Last year was Kurt Rambis, who took over for Derek Fisher. Derek Fisher took over in 2014 for Mike Woodson, who took over in 2012 for Mike D'Antoni, who took over in 2008 from Isaiah Thomas, who took over in 2006 from Larry Brown, from 2005, Herb Williams, 2004, Lenny Wilkins, and 2001, Don Chaney. You have to go back to Jeff Van Gundy, 96 to 2001, to find a head coach for the New York Knicks that coached more than 4 years with that team. And you have to go back to, 1967 to 77 to find somebody with a longer tenure than Van Gundy's 5 years. If you want to know what's wrong with the New York Knicks, it starts from the top down, and it has for 40 years now. Jim Dolan is willing to spend money. When I say the top down, I don't necessarily mean there. Is he a great owner? I don't know. He does well with the Rangers, but the head coaching carousel that is the New York Knicks, which is now being run by Phil Jackson, who, quite honestly, appears to have little idea. Outside of the Porzingis draft pick, he appears to have little idea with what he's doing. And at some point, James Dolan has to say this experiment has not worked. It just hasn't. If you look, and this is the bizarre part, if you look across town, you find the New Jersey Nets, right? And the Nets are a sad franchise. They're in last place. They're not good. They're going to have the number 1 pick, but it's not even their pick. It belongs to the Celtics. It's a mess. So what did the Nets do after their previous management decided that colossal aforementioned Celtics trade with Garnett and Pierce, after they thought that was a good idea? What did they go out and do? They didn't go hire Phil Jackson. They didn't go find somebody that it has a big name. They didn't go hire Mike D'Antoni. They didn't hire Mike Woodson. What did they do? They started from the top, and they decided to bring in Sean Marks. Now, I don't know if Sean Marks is going to be successful in Brooklyn, rebuilding this team. He's got a lot of work to do. That team competes still. To this point of the season, they still fight and they still play hard. They lose, but they play hard. But where did Sean Marks come from? Sean Marks came from the San Antonio Spurs. And if you want to know how to rebuild your team, there's no exact way to do it. There's no exact science. And there's no way to guarantee that whatever choice you do take is going to work. There's no way to do that. But if you go to San Antonio and you find a well-respected guy in a very, very successful, the most successful organization in the past 15 years, you've got yourself on the right track. The New York Knicks, they're not at the right racetrack. They're nowhere close. They're nowhere close. And stripping it down and building it back up is the only way to do it. The interesting part is you have a potential superstar in your hands. The problem is you can't play him. He's got a minute count with Porzingis. Can you get him healthy and keep him healthy? This team's not going to win a championship in the next 3 years for sure. And 4 years from now is fuzzy, but it would seem nearly impossible. The problem is the management that's in place there now, that timetable could get longer and longer because they got to figure out what they're doing. Found that one to be interesting. If I was Carmelo, and Carmelo came out and said to his teammates, according to a report, that he's not going to let Phil Jackson run him out of town. And you know what? I don't blame him, because right now we're heading to a crossroad and Jackson's coming down one road, Carmelo's going down the other. They're going to hit, and Carmelo's going to win. And he should. He should. I wanted to mention this before we get to Pez. I watched I'm like halfway through, maybe 3/4 of the way through a documentary that was recommended to me on Netflix. And it is fascinating. Now, they made a movie about this a couple of years ago, but this is the documentary. It's called Team Foxcatcher. It's all about John DuPont and the U.S. wrestling scandal. And I didn't know anything about this guy. I read that the movie that came out, Foxcatcher, was somewhat inaccurate. I didn't see it with the details, but watching the documentary itself, this is a bizarre guy, and I would recommend it. I don't know how it ends. I haven't finished it yet, but I would recommend checking that out. So there's your quick little recommendation. So let's get to a couple of the things that people sent in as far as the Bruins stuff goes, because we're going to get to Pez here in a second. Let's see. I know Mark wrote in talking about the Bruins. It was definitely done to soften the media blow. He's talking about the Bruins announcing and holding their conference when it did. It was definitely done to soften the media blow and not make headlines. Can you blame them? Firing Julien was the wrong move. It was done just because management didn't like him, even though he's the reason they have a remote shot at the playoffs this year. This team should be, and most likely will be, a dumpster fire on the ice. But Julien was doing a great job turning nothing into something. I could go on forever about the distinction of that entire situation, but I won't. I agree. He said dysfunction, not distinction. There you go. Hashtag autocorrect. I like that. No, I agree. And that's what I want to talk to Pez about, because you're not supposed to fire a coach unless you're going to go get a better one. That's the common rule, unless you have a better one that you like that you're going to go get. There's not a better coach available than Claude Julien. Now, Ken Hitchcock's available, Gerard Gallant's available, and now Julien is available. But the Bruins aren't going to get either of those other two guys. They're going to start with a fresh rebuild, which is the only thing about this that makes me say, all right, maybe there's a small point to that, is if you're going to rebuild, then rebuild from every angle. And maybe that involves finding a coach that you like, that's young, that you want to give your team a chance to learn with, and that's totally okay. But I'm curious about the language that was used to justify the firing. And that's what I want to talk to Pez about. So let's get to that without any further ado. Pez from Daisy Orr.
The Calhoun Show.
All right. Joining me on the podcast, first time on the show, it's Greg or Pez from Daisy Orr. What's going on, man?
Hey, man, what's going on? Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. This has been a fun couple of days in Boston that took a weird turn with the Bruins.
Oh my God, it's crazy. Between like people celebrating the Patriots and absolutely hating the Bruins, it's a weird sports landscape going on right now.
All right, so I don't want to focus too much on just when they did it because that's really interesting and compelling, but I want to talk about the Bruins themselves too. But first, this has been and you talked about this in the article on Days of Yore, this has been coming, right? Like, this isn't a shock that Julien got fired, but with the reports coming out for weeks and then all of a sudden it happens the day after the Super Bowl, what was your reaction?
So, people figured it was coming. I mean, people thought it was coming last year. People thought it was coming in the summer, and then people thought it was coming up until 2 weeks ago. My reaction was, it was 8 a.m. I got an email popped into my inbox from the Bruins. It was like, the Bruins have relieved Claude Julien of his coaching duties. I was getting coffee at McDonald's and pulled over. And I had to read it like 3 times, and I just read it, and I was like, holy shit, they actually fired him. And then I got to work. We have a G chat with the Days of Yore staff, and I was like, guys, Julien got fired, and someone's like, wait, the parade's today, and then it took off.
Yeah.
So I wasn't surprised he got fired. I was shocked. I mean, the guy's been here for a decade. It was more shocked, like, wow, I can't believe they actually did it. But then once it set in, the timing of it is kind of what set everyone off.
Now, he's been there for a decade. He has the Stanley Cup. The Bruins were middling before he got there. What are you going to remember about Claude Julien in Boston?
I think what I'm going to remember most is that so a lot of people don't remember that Boston, before Claude Julien came in, was a coaching nightmare. You had guys like Mike Sullivan, who didn't do very well here, has showed that he can actually coach NHL teams. Dave Lewis did not have a great run here. Claude Julien brought stability. He brought a Stanley Cup, and that's with him and Chara and Savard and Tim Thomas. It's a group effort, but Claude was really the guy who put the system in place to have these guys succeed. And once they started playing his brand of hockey, they were dominant. From, you can say 2009 to 2010, despite them kind of falling apart in the playoffs, all the way up to 13-14 when they lost in the Cup Finals to the Blackhawks.
Being a Penguins fan, I can certainly attest to the 2 goals in 4 game effort that they had against the Bruins. So I remember how good those teams were. And you mentioned Claude's system, and I don't know if you can attribute it to the historical shooting percentage that they have right now. I mean, it's just dismal. Or is it more the blue line? What was the downfall?
The downfall this year. So the downfall of the Bruins is like this Shakespearean 3-act play, and it really started in the Chiarelli era with like the trading of Sagan. I think the trading of Sagan was kind of the downfall, because I tweeted out the other day, in an alternate universe, the Bruins could realistically ice a Marchand, Sagan, passionate line.
Yeah.
Which is just like a disgusting NHL 17 / All-Star lineup. But really what happened this year was, it's kind of a little bit of everything. Don Sweeney put some really bad contract extensions on the blue line with Adam McQuaid and Kevin Miller. Kevin Miller is a better defenseman than everyone in Boston gives him credit for. But last year he was playing in the second pairing because that's all they had. He's a good 5th defenseman, great 6th defenseman, and the roster is currently comprised of good 5th defenseman, great 6th defenseman. Zdeno Chara is getting older. Brandon Carlo is struggling now. He's hit his rookie wall, and so he's struggling. It's just the blue line isn't as great as people thought it would be. And the shooting percentage is just awful. But I don't really think a shooting percentage is a coaching thing. That's more on the players, because I talk about Corsi a lot, and I'm not going to bang on about it, for the podcast, but it measures possession, and if you can possess the puck all you want, and you can shoot a lot, but they're not going in. And that's more on the players than I believe it is the coach.
Now the players is interesting, right? So now you have to make a choice, both with the next coach and the direction of the team, on is this a Band-Aid fix or is this a complete teardown? And I think you're going to tell me that with guys like Marchand and Krejci, and I know where you are on the David Backes contract, and you can talk about that. How do you rebuild this team with those pieces?
So this is like Don Sweeney's last stand kind of thing, because right off the bat, you fire the coach. So they are currently out of a playoff spot, but they're fighting with Philadelphia for that last wild card spot. Philadelphia has a game in hand, and they have 59 points. The Bruins have 58. So they don't make the playoffs. It's really no longer on the coaching. It's on the person that constructed the roster. How you make this team viable going forward is a great question. I hate the David Backes contract. I think it's probably one of the worst contracts in hockey, and I say that because it's $6 million a year for the next 4 years after this year with a no movement clause. He's 32 years old. He plays that heavy power forward fighter banger style. And we watched in Boston, Milan Lucic went from 30 goals a year to 14 goals a year to this like resurgence, but he's playing with Connor McDavid. I can have 15 goals next to Connor McDavid, and I can get up and down the ice without wanting to pass out.
Yeah, that seems to be Lucic's only job in Edmonton now, is just stay alive and try to keep up.
Right. So with the Bruins, the problem is you have a hockey team with a very top-heavy contracted group. So David Krejci's here for another 5 years. That's $7.25 million with a no-movement clause. Brad Marchand has a no-movement clause. Patrice Bergeron has a no-movement clause. Danilo Chara has no movement. Chico Rask, no movement. You have David Backes, no movement. It is just no movements and no trades, like up and down the roster. And it will make it really hard for Sweeney to build this team. But these are the contracts that he has signed, most of them. Peter Chiarelli did the David Krejci deal, and it drives me insane.
Now, are the no movement clauses, and maybe this is just a guess, is this Sweeney just overreacting to the expansion? Because it seems like this is like those guys, that's a lot of no movement for one roster.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of them, like Rask, and a lot of them were signed by Chiarelli, and Chiarelli was always like, I'm going to take care of my guys. So he overpaid Chris Kelly, who was his guy in Ottawa. He overpaid David Krejci. Because if you think about it now, David Krejci was the one who should have been traded in 2013 and not Tyler Seguin, based on injury history, because David Krejci has really bad hips. He has the hips of like an 80-year-old man. And for the past 2 years, they have held him out of playing games. So Chiarelli took care of his boys. And that included the Bergeron contract, which is fine because Patrice Bergeron is still one of the best two-way guys in the NHL. But that was also guys like Krejci. And now David Backes really came out of nowhere. I don't even think Boston fans even had David Backes on their radar, but stuff like that. I don't like. Matt Bolesky has a no movement / no trade. So I'm not sure what all of these mean and why Don Sweeney signed all of them. And if he just said, all right, well, will that get you to sign the contract? Great, we'll throw that in.
Yeah, that makes sense. When coaching changes happen, the first thing that you look at is who does it help and who does it hurt. And I heard Jeff Merrick and Greg Wyshynski talking about this the other day, with David Backes just kind of being a quintessential Claude Julien guy, like plays that style. Are there young guys that excite you on this team that maybe a faster pace might open them up?
Yeah, the one guy who probably was doing backflips was Ryan Spooner. So Ryan Spooner is he's a third line center, but on the power play, he has a little bit of Mark Savard in him, plays along the wall, has very good vision, can throw that puck around like nobody's business. But Julien hates guys like that who can't play defense. So there was one night, Ryan had 2 goals and assists in the first thing. Claude Julien said was, yeah, but he didn't get back on defense. So Ryan Spooner, if Cassidy goes with a more energetic style, Ryan Spooner will absolutely look like, probably closer to a second-line center than just a third-line playmaking center. So he's probably the guy I look at and say, if anyone's going to prosper under Bruce Cassidy, it's going to be him.
All right, I got 2 more for you. The first, I think you're going to like the first one. I'm going to let you sit in Cam Neely's seat with carte blanche, whatever you want to do. How do you fix the Bruins from here?
How I fix the Bruins from here? Okay. I get on my knees and pray that Adam McQuaid is taken in the expansion draft.
That's not a good. If that's number 1, we're not off to a good start.
No, yeah, but because what that does, if you look at the Bruins defense, guys like McQuaid, for some reason, guys that can throw hands are loved in Boston, and that's McQuaid's biggest asset. Other than that, he's a garbage truck on fire. He's awful, and he plays in the 4th pairing. He plays the 4th spot on the 2nd pairing. Some nights. What I do is I try to shop David Krejci as a legit first-line center. He's not, but there are some teams that can probably bite. And what I do is I shop him for a defenseman, and I go to Colorado and I say, hey, what would it take for Matt Duchene? Duchene's contract is much better than David Krejci's. It's shorter, and maybe even because they won't do a 1-to-1 swap because they don't want centers. They want to get better. So I would say, what do you want from Matt Duchene? The only people off the table are Brandon Carlo and Charlie McAvoy. And the good thing about the Bruins is their future defensemen look amazing. Carlo looks pretty good, although he's hit a wall. Charlie McAvoy, I don't know if you watched the World Juniors this year, but McAvoy was a stud.
I've seen. I didn't see the World Juniors. I see a little bit of BU here and there, though. So
he was. It was amazing. It was like the game he had versus Canada was just like a 2.5-hour sportsgasm just watching this kid play. It was great. And they have kids like Ryan Lindgren and Jacob Zaboral, and they have a good group. I'll give Don Tweedy this: the man can draft. Seemingly can't do much else, but he can draft. So my biggest targets are I'm trading David Krejci because I have to pay David Pastrnak, and I'm gonna pay him. I'll give him whatever he wants. He wants $6 million, fine. I'll give it to you. You're 20 years old and you're already a 20-goal scorer in the NHL. Great.
Yep, gotta keep him.
So I'm looking to trade David Pastrnak. I'm looking to get a defenseman back because their forwards aren't as bad as people think, and I don't think this forward team is going to shoot as bad as people think, either the rest of the year or next year. It's fixing that blue line because once you get that blue line even adequate, Tuukka Rask is a Vezina winner, hands down. He saved the team this year, but there's been. I'm going to give you this little tidbit of information. So Monday, I get into work. Claude Julien's been fired. Get a phone call. Got a friend who's very hooked into the NHL. He goes, dude, the weekend was a disaster in Boston. I said, what are you talking about, man? He goes, rumor has it that Julien went into the front office, basically said, this roster is horseshit. Fire me right now.
Wow.
And they tried to work it out, and he ended up getting fired.
All right. Well, that lets him off the hook a little bit with the timing of it, if that's true.
Right. And, there's rumors that Tuukka Rask isn't happy. They've overworked him because the backup goaltending is really, really bad.
Oh, horrendous.
The backup goaltending is like 1-9-2 or 1-9-1 in their last 11 games. It's really bad.
I think I think I saw that stat. I think that's for the whole year when he's not in net. They're 1-9-1. Right. It's horrendous.
11 total, yeah.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, it's really bad.
It's bad. All right, finish this sentence. The rest of the 2017 Boston Bruins season will be blank.
A disaster. Because they're not going to make the playoffs. They're not a playoff team. someone earlier today was like, "Oh, the Bruins are a good 7 or 8 seed," and I just said, "Dude, seeds aren't a thing anymore. It's first 3 in the division and 2 wild cards, and right now the first wild card team is your number 4 team in the East. So get the old playoff style mentality of seeding and throw it away.
Yeah,
because that's not going to work.
It's gone. You can't be a middle of the road team. Not in a good division, at least.
The Metropolitan Division is cleaning house. So I think it's going to be a disaster. I think it's going to be what we've watched this whole year. Poor shooting, poor defense, and a goaltender who's had to stay on his head to try to get them to where they're at now, which is out of the playoffs.
Oh, it'll be fun to watch. It'll be, or at least it'll be interesting. At least it'll be interesting.
When the Bruins are bad, we're at our best. So bring it on.
All right, Greg or Pez from Daisy or at Pez DOY, plug the podcast too.
All right, so you can catch us at soundcloud.com/Daisy or it's the optional skate. We do it once every 2 weeks. Come over, listen to some great Bruins takes and have a great time.
It's awesome. Hey, we'll do this again for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
Loved it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
The Calhoun Show.
That was awesome. Thank you to Greg for coming on. I'm really glad I reached out to him. I had a blast. That's it for the podcast this week. We will obviously be back next week. All sorts of fun stuff happening here. Check out Days of Yore and Greg's stuff at Pez DOY on Twitter. We have a bunch of things that we're going to do next week, including your sports bucket list. People have been sending those in. I wanted to do it all in one little fell swoop, so we're going to do that next week. I want to talk to my sister. I think she left us a voicemail, so we might close the show with that. Talking about the halftime show. She led into it last week on the podcast in case you missed it. But that was a lot of fun. And everybody, send the retweets out. Recommend the show to people if you enjoy. And if Greg brought you here from Days of Yore and you like the show, please hit subscribe. And thanks for coming around. So again, thanks to Greg, and we will talk to you guys next week on The Calhoun Show.
All right, so I'm not one to brag when I know the right answer to something or when I say the right thing on the show, but I'm just going to say zooming in on a guitar when you first start your halftime show means quality is going to improve. Girlfriend didn't lip sync. Girlfriend had outfit changes. She had a crowd that was singing along and having a good time, and they basically used more fireworks than Houston has seen ever. Stephanie approves of the halftime show.
Thank you for listening to The Calhoun Show. Join the conversation by following the show on Twitter at Calhoun Show and emailing the show at calhounshow@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe and download for free on iTunes. Want to hear yourself on the show? Leave us a voicemail by calling 860-740-2119.